Good evening and welcome to OTF Connect webinars. Tonight you are going to be hearing about nurturing world shapers through critical inquiry. We have a terrific speaker for you tonight. She works with the Critical Thinking Consortium. Her name is Maria Benvalis. I hope, Maria, I have said that correctly. We're very lucky to have her as a presenter. She's taken her message and ideas outside of Canada, and I'm pretty excited to hear and see this session today. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Thank you so much, Trish, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for giving of your time this evening to be together. It's always such a great privilege to work with Ontario's dedicated educators. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I have been teaching for over 16 years. I was the Director of Youth Programs at War Child Canada, and in that role I was able to support educators and students across the country in developing an understanding of global citizenship. I've also taught primarily at the intermediate level, but have taught from grade 5 up to grade 12. And I'm currently completing doctoral studies at OISE at the University of Toronto, where my focus is on citizenship, as well as some of the tensions between citizenship and reconciliation and how our understandings of citizenship might change. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about, in addition to doing some work with UNESCO as well on how we shift paradigms of education, particularly in the face of climate change. So these are some of the areas that have been passions for me. And obviously, if you've been drawn to the session tonight, I know that citizenship is clearly a passion for you as well. Just as we're getting started here, I'd love to, using the checkmark tool that Trish introduced, the yes/no, if people have been in a session with the Critical Thinking Consortium before, could you indicate that? Okay, great. So most people have. If you have been in a session with me specifically before, if you could just indicate that. Fantastic. So there's just a couple of the key pieces then that I usually like to do as review, and we can go through those a little more quickly. But what I'm hoping tonight is that we have a chance for reflection, for really thinking about bringing together citizenship in the work that we do around critical inquiry. So a number of you do have experience with the Critical Thinking Consortium's framework, so it will be very familiar, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see how we can harness that in order to really intentionally develop citizenship in our students. If people, as we're going, just want to type in the chat box where you're teaching, what grade you're teaching, and perhaps what you're hoping to get out of tonight's session. If you want to take to the chat box and do that now, that would be great. And as you finish doing that, the question I would like everyone to consider is, as you're thinking about your own classroom, your own practice right now, what's the most impactful way that you currently nurture active citizenship in your students? I know that there's a depth and wealth of experience in this webinar tonight, and so I'd really like to have the opportunity for everyone to have a chance to share. Just if you could pick one thing that you're currently doing that you feel really intentionally nurtures active citizenship in your students, what would that be? And you can actually type that directly on the slide. So using the text tool that Trish introduced, I've created the blank purple box so that people can write that so that we can all see it. Okay, so we've got, just having gone into the chat box, we've got a broad range of people here tonight, which is great, from grade 5 up to grade 12. And what I love about the opportunity to have everyone here together is that we can really think about some of the key ways that we can engage citizenship in the work that we do. So I'm seeing, just again, a number of really excellent strategies that people are applying in their classrooms: challenge-based learning projects, taking a global issue, learning about it, problem solving at the local level, an awareness of community events, independent inquiry, asking pointed questions, collaborative learning, connecting to prior knowledge, and having students make active connections between what they're learning and what they see in the community or around the world. So these are all really powerful intentions in ways that we're trying to nurture this citizenship in students. What I've come to understand in my own work is that if I were to summarize what I think is at the core of citizenship education, I think that fundamentally when we're talking about nurturing citizens, we're talking about developing the capacity to make really good decisions and to build very strong relationships. And that those are two very fundamental dimensions of citizenship education. If we took it to its essence, it's about really strong decision making in the face of complexity, and it's about building strong and healthy relationships across difference and with the ability to negotiate conflict in effective ways. So tonight I'm hoping we're going to tap into how we might do that using a critical inquiry approach, as well as bring a bit, because I like for the webinars to engage both the practical, but also that chance for reflection and bringing a bit of the theory into it as well. So we're bringing theory and practice together. The one piece of theory I did want to share, and some of you may be familiar with it, is it's a very foundational study around citizenship education that was conducted by Joel Westheimer and Joseph Kane in 2004. And they took the time through their study to differentiate between what they call personally responsible citizenship, which is also referred to as character education, participatory citizenship, and justice-oriented citizenship. So I just wanted to bring this forward because I think it's helpful in the work that we're doing as educators to clarify perhaps some of the ways we might frame citizenship for students, some of the ways we might engage them in citizenship education, what some of the actions might be in the continuum of actions we might offer to them or support them in developing, and also getting clear on some of the core assumptions with citizenship. So I'll just give people a moment to just take a look at this. And if there's anything you wanted to say in response to it, any questions or comments, feel free to either take the mic or write some of your comments and questions in the chat box. At the core of Westheimer and Kane's work was their conclusion that the educational programming and curricular choices that we make as educators have very real consequences for the kind of society we ultimately help to create. So Melanie's point, I see this as a continuum. How do we teach how to move level? Like move across the continuum? Is that, just wanting to clarify your question, is that what you meant? Like moving across from personally responsible into participatory? So Yes, okay. Yeah, so we're going to explore that tonight. I think talking about the ways, the choices we make in how we frame our critical inquiries, and distinguishing between the kind of actions so that we know, what kind of citizenship are we nurturing? What is our intention? It was interesting because in their study they did conclude that students who were presented with opportunities to actively participate really developed the capacity to participate in society, but they didn't necessarily develop their capacity to address root causes. And conversely, students who really had were engaged in actions and learning that allowed them to develop an understanding of root causes of social issues didn't necessarily increase their engagement and participation. So in many ways, it's how do we bring these things together for some truly robust and transformative citizenship? And the question really, that we have tonight is how do we inspire and nurture students in becoming engaged citizens through critical inquiry? And I've got some pictures of some young people who definitely fit the description of being engaged citizens. I'm not sure if some people are familiar with some of these young people, but Alex Lortz started a whole youth movement in the United States who are currently, they've got an app, I Matter, and they engage youth digitally, but they're also suing the US government for inaction on climate change. So that is some pretty intensive engagement. Charmaine Moyo is a young person in Zimbabwe who actually developed a whole recycling program where there wasn't one in her community. Takena Blaney has become a water ambassador internationally. She is from First Nations in British Columbia, and she uses song and her cultural, the cultural art forms to actually engage others in these issues. And Boyan Slat is an innovator from the Netherlands who is launching this year his design for clearing the oceans of the plastic that's collected. So these young people have been truly engaged citizens in the world. So how do we nurture that and inspire that kind of action? So tonight the challenge I have for the group, and I'd love for you to create a thought space, whether on a piece of paper or in your computer, whatever's comfortable for you, and to be thinking about and collecting some powerful instructional choices and tactics and strategies that you can make to nurture relevant active citizenship outcomes through critical inquiry. So I'm hoping that by the end of our session that you will have hopefully more than 3, but that you'll be able to select 3 that you find most powerful that you can take into your context. So I want to just ground us in the Ontario Citizenship Education Framework, which is in the front matter of all of the social studies, history, and geography curriculum. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it on the screen in a moment, and there's 4 quadrants. And I'd like for you to take a moment and select from each quadrant the most relevant outcome for your context. It could be that right now you're working on a particular unit or you're planning a unit. It could be that you have a particular group of students and you've already observed who they are and you've gotten to know them, and there's some outcomes that you really, really want to nurture in them. So I'm hoping that's big enough for everyone to see and clear enough. But if you could take a moment, and I think Trisha's actually put it there too in the link just in case you need a larger version of it. If you could select 1 from active participation, 1 from identity, 1 from structures, and 1 from attributes. So I'll give people about 3 or 4 minutes for this task. That's great. Thank you. I love that you're putting the check mark right on it. Thank you. Or just give people another minute, and as you're doing that, one of the reasons I find it's really important to bring forward the citizenship education framework is that we do often hear that sometimes teachers we don't always go back to that front matter in the curriculum, and yet this is there, and this is there in the curriculum really is this guiding framework that can support teacher thinking and the decisions that we're making around citizenship. And we can't do all of these things in one class or with one grade, but if we start to select, one from each quadrant that we want to develop some really deep learning around with students, and we start to organize some of our units or some of our learning experiences with the real intentionality around these competencies, some very, very powerful things happen in the classroom. So I want to thank everyone. I hope that everyone's had a chance to complete the task. And what we just did was an example of critical thinking. And just a reminder for those who have worked with us before, the consortium is a not-for-profit based in British Columbia. We were founded in British Columbia. We do work nationally. And we developed over time a pedagogically useful definition of critical thinking. And we define critical thinking as thinking through a problematic situation about what to believe or how to act, where the thinker is having to make a reasoned judgment. And in making that reasoned judgment, you're bringing to bear intellectual tools. So in what I just asked you to do, you were bringing forward background knowledge about your own context, about your own understanding of citizenship. You were using the criteria of relevance to decide. I'm not sure what kind of thinking strategies you might have been engaged with. You might have been creating a bit of a chart for yourself. The quadrant itself sort of framed things to support thinking about these different dimensions. And there also are habits of mind that we're always bringing to bear whenever we're thinking critically. Some of those habits of mind could be empathy, considering diverse perspectives, perseverance, intellectual integrity, attention to detail, flexible mindedness or open-mindedness. And I think more and more we also see how these habits of mind in our shared common civic space are so important and so vital to the democratic space that we're creating. Oh yes, you used reason judgment. That's great. We talked about, I've said to students that while their opinion matters, what has greater value in the class is a reason judgment. And I try to intentionally use the language of reason judgment, even over opinion, to help differentiate between what a sound opinion is. A sound opinion really is a reason judgment. So when we're thinking about our classroom, and we're thinking about a thinking classroom is a classroom that is also nurturing thinking citizens. So what kind of climate are we creating that supports the kind of thinking that we want to nurture in students? How are we creating opportunities for critical, creative, and collaborative thinking? How are we building student capacity to think in deep and meaningful ways? How do we teach them to think? That thinking is something, it's a methodology, it's not an end-of-unit enterprise. It's the way in which we're learning. We're learning to think and thinking to learn. And how do we provide guidance that actually informs thinking? And across the bottom are those intellectual tools. And this is really at the heart, I think, of nurturing citizenship. And we talked about citizenship being the ability to make very good decisions. So how do we spark that and create authentic opportunities for students that nurture those competencies? This is just a very quick review. Most of you have engaged with us before, so you will have done this. So this is really a reminder of the way in which we're framing our questions. So just give you a moment again to look and distinguish between those type 1, type 2, and type 3 questions. So we talk about those type 1s as being, those are fact-based questions. There is a right or wrong answer. The type 2 are more personal preference. There is no right or wrong answer. And those type 3 questions do require some curiosity and some investigation. There's not necessarily one right answer, and not every answer is a good answer. So those are the more of the critical thinking. We've problematized the same issue. So if the issue is, looking at the election, an upcoming election with students, and you want students to have an understanding of the difference between the political parties, it's the way in which we problematize the curriculum to invite deeper thinking. And it's that idea that we can engage students in learning the facts and concepts, but through a methodology that invites a deeper understanding. Thanks for everyone's insightful comments. So this taxonomy of engagement is really what we're aiming for. We're talking about engaged citizens tonight. So nurturing engagement in students. It's moving up this taxonomy that students are genuinely challenged and transformed. And I think in a democratic process, not only are we hoping to challenge and transform students, but we're inviting students into the process of challenging and transforming their community and the world. It really is both ways. And so that's the kind of dynamic for us to explore and think about in the task that we're designing. Is we're not just creating those opportunities to challenge and transform them, but we're doing that with the purpose of students ultimately being able to transform and challenge their communities in powerful ways. I wanted to take this moment to differentiate between research and inquiry, a research-based inquiry versus critical inquiry. And not to say that research-based inquiry doesn't have its place, but again, tonight we're talking about critical inquiry. And the question I've got at the bottom is, what kind of citizen? So if we're going back to Westheimer and Kane's idea that the choices we make have consequences for the kind of society we ultimately help to create, what kind of citizen are we nurturing when we're engaging students in critical inquiry? Right, where we haven't just asked them to go and research the issue of homelessness and then give us back what they found on Wikipedia, maybe with some, I joke about this, but maybe with some sparkles along the, the Bristol board, but that we've invited them into tasks where they actually must interpret and assess information in textbooks and elsewhere, where they have to reach their own conclusions using the available information, where we're asking them to question the data and information that they're finding in primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. And this really, in order for students to do this, it is about how we intentionally nurture those intellectual tools. So one of the ways, we're going to explore a number of different strategies at this point. One of the ways that we can invite students into meaningful critical inquiry is by designing an effective overarching critical challenge. So it's looking at taking some of the learning expectations that might form what has traditionally been known as a unit, and we look at those expectations and we think about ways that we create an inquiry that will guide the learning. I like to think of overarching inquiries as horizon questions. They're questions that we're not going to definitively answer in the time that we're together. How and why questions are those kinds of overarching inquiry questions. So how might we effectively respond to our changing environment, right? That is a very broad horizon question that we're going to be thinking about for a long time. But in the time that we're together, we take that overarching inquiry, the how and why question, and we frame a critical challenge around it. And that critical challenge becomes the slice of that overarching inquiry that we're going to look at together. So for example, if our overarching inquiry is, how should we respond to our changing Earth? The slice of that question that we're going to look at as a class is to create a compelling message to the world that highlights the 3 most powerful ideas and 3 most inspiring and sustainable responses to our changing environment. Because now we've created a manageable critical challenge that we can scaffold. So that becomes our critical inquiry. Are there any questions at this point? Just wanting to check in with the group and how it's going. If you want to give me a thumbs up or a check. Okay, great. So an authentic performance task, if we want to think about an overarching critical challenge that becomes an authentic performance task, and now we're thinking about this in the context of citizenship, it should really simulate life outside of school and have an audience beyond the teacher and the classroom. And perhaps not even simulate life, but even better, be truly real world. And it requires students to demonstrate their learning through a performance or the creation of a product. But the more authentic that product is, and we're going to look at that, I'm going to give some examples of that, the more authentic that product is. So again, thinking about citizenship, if it's a social action project, that can nurture really profound engagement in students. And the research continues to show it really heartens me and humbles me how the research continues to show that it is that experiential learning that makes the most difference in terms of nurturing democratic citizenship in students. it just continues to be highlighted by the research, how fundamental that is. So here's some ideas about some authentic performance tasks that might nurture active citizenship. So again, you can tweak these for your own context, but just some ideas here. So, and thinking about how we create authentic audiences for students, it is quite amazing how when students know that there is a genuine audience beyond us as teachers for the work that they do, for the thinking that they're doing, it's quite amazing how they rise to that. Because their work becomes very meaningful. When they know that a local counselor is going to come in and hear their proposals, it really does enhance engagement. When students are invited to take their message out of the school in different ways, or that they are going to write a letter and actually those letters will be submitted, or they're going to create a compelling message and that message will be posted online and it will be shared. The more that there is an authentic audience where there's that relationship, where there's a connection to community, where there's a connection to the structures within our society, and that they have a sense that they might be able to have a voice or be heard, students really do rise to that challenge. Another issue when we're creating authentic performance tasks is to, one of the things that really struck me, I think, as the evidence around issues like climate change has become more dire, quite frankly. One of the questions I asked from an ethical place as a teacher that I struggled with is how do I educate in a way that creates hope? When a lot of these issues, when we actually get into them, they are seemingly intractable. The root causes are very complex. How do we do that? And so I did start to invite appreciative inquiry as one of the ways to do this, so that when there is a problem that we might be looking at together, appreciative inquiry, what it does is wrap a frame of how might we. So you'll see that students, we did authentic social action projects, and students, they only had 2 criteria. It had to be something that made the lives of others, of the community, better in some way, and it had to be something they were genuinely passionate or curious about. And then one of the tasks we did is to frame a how might we question around it. And what that how might we does is open up possibility, so that even as they're researching and learning about the challenges and the very real issues, they are being guided by possibility and imagination and hopefulness in that process. So they're becoming Imagineers, as my colleague Garfield Ginny Newman says. So they become Imagineers. We're inviting them to be innovators. We're inviting them to be problem solvers, authentic problem solvers. So let's say, here's another example in grade 8 geography, and this can be tweaked in some of the other curricula as well. But in grade 8 geography, how do we create sustainable communities for large numbers of people to inhabit? Let's say that is our overarching question. Well, now we've created that slice, that critical challenge. Design an effective response to an issue that highlights the interaction of human settlement and the environment. So, you know, these are some examples, what I just showed you, of students now beginning an authentic social action project around that. And here's an example of what one student did. This is, we're talking about 13 and 14-year-olds who got so invigorated by the challenge and were scaffolded in their thinking all the way through, and had researched what the impact of flooding is in communities, and recognized that not only was it the loss of homes that was devastating, but it was the loss of the community because people scattered. And so she thought about how she might create temporary tents. This is obviously an adaptation strategy, not a mitigation strategy, but an adaptation strategy where she researched what would be a very humane way in which we could respond to a natural disaster, right? And so this is a 13-year-old, as I said, starting to think in this way, right? This is only a piece of the authentic design. And we had a global expo. We had a Global Futures Expo, and the community was invited in, and the students displayed their projects and proposals and ideas. We invited political leaders. We invited members from not-for-profit organizations, and they came in to hear the students' ideas. And there was such an incredible buzz because it was very, very authentic for them. Another idea with map making that, in the geography curriculum, how can we use maps? Maps are powerful ways that we can engage with citizenship education. Not only by creating effective maps that communicate messages, but by having students study maps in terms of green belts, wildlife conservation, using their spatial skills to really support citizenship in so many ways. So how can we take map making and building map making skills and do that together with citizenship? Like, we need those citizens who have that understanding of spatial significance and what the impacts of various development projects are in a community. Right? So in this case, it was students actually creating an artistic map, so bringing arts integration, but also having a message. So it was building the spatial skills, arts integration, as well as environmental literacy. One of the other ideas around critical inquiry is to launch students in the task right from day one. Not to start, with, let's say we want to learn about some of the key concepts, and we're going to do those first, and then we'll do our authentic challenge. But put the authentic challenge right up front, because that way we're giving time for students to think about it all the way through. So if our critical challenge is to create a compelling message to the world, then let's have students write their compelling message to the world on the first day. And then as they continue to learn, they revisit. And so the thinking becomes more complex, more sophisticated. I like to say it becomes thicker, right? The thinking becomes thicker. Like, sometimes that thinking is very thin at the beginning. There's not a lot there. There's not a lot of background knowledge. There's not a lot of conceptual understanding. But now we've given them this meaningful task so that the learning that they're doing has a purpose. And that's another really exciting frame for critical inquiry, right? It's this idea that the task, rather than being proof of learning, becomes the driver for the learning, becomes the invitation for the students to learn. And what we're doing is choreographing that learning experience. I just saw this comment here: does the movement of Parkland students demonstrate this? I think in terms of, I'm not sure what specifically that was in reference to from previously, but I think absolutely it's quite interesting to hear the Parkland students talking as well about the role that their teachers have played in the development of their ability to be active and engaged. Now, in this case, here's another youth activist, Kat Martinez, is his name, and he has founded a whole movement called Earth Guardians, and they're directly responding to climate change. And he's delivered a speech. But I just want you to think about this frame of do you agree? And think about all the different issues across the curricula from grade 5 to grade 12 where you can create these provocations. Do you agree? And have students generate their initial thinking about this, their initial positions. And as they continue to engage and learn more, having them revisit their position. And that is very powerful because that is nurturing as well the open-mindedness. So this structure, provocations that we can use to really nurture citizenship, right? Again, reason, judgment, not opinions. And actually assessing students for their open-mindedness and flexible-mindedness. Actually making that an assessment look for, the students understanding that that habit of mind is being valued in this classroom is really, really important. When we are talking about action projects, I also just wanted to help everyone just differentiate. I found it very helpful when I'm designing or planning, the learning that I want to happen in the classroom between indirect action and direct action. And again, just being clear, not that one is better than the other, but being clear in our intentions. What are we asking students to do, or what are they asking us they want to participate in? Is it indirect or direct? So what I'm just going to invite you to do right now is look at some of these different projects and consider where you might put them on the spectrum. Yeah, and Melanie, as you said, a great stand on the line or fold the line activity for sure with that provocation earlier. And it's helping students and ourselves just understanding what type of action project do we want to engage with, the indirect or the direct. Okay, I hope that was enough time for everyone. The action project problem-solving model is very, very well supported as a critical inquiry process. So it's to first clarify the problem or issue, to design a sound solution or approach to that problem or issue, to develop an effective course of action, and to implement and evaluate the action. And you can bring in rich design thinking components into this as well, or systems thinking, if any people are familiar with systems thinking, and some of the ways you can invite students to do some systems thinking around their problem or issue. The Waters Institute has some great ideas around systems thinking, Donetta Meadows, and the systems thinking playbook. And some of them can be pretty sophisticated, but they can also be very powerful to get at the complexity sometimes of the problems and helping students go beyond those surface solutions. Once they can grapple with a bit of the complexity and the diverse perspectives, then their solutions themselves start to reflect that. So here's another way, another tweak of just inviting critical thinking. Let's say you want to introduce some issues to students. Rather than telling them the issue, present them with some statistics, right? Present them with some statistics and facts and ask them to, it's essentially a decode the puzzle. You know, what is the pressing problem? Joy, just to answer your question, systems thinking is a way of thinking in which we understand not just the simple cause and effect relationships that we usually have a lens to when there's a problem, but understanding the larger systemic dynamics at play. So, you know, overfishing, for example, can sometimes not reflect an understanding of the larger system, of even the larger ecosystem. And so how do we expand our understanding of the more complex dynamics, not just cause and effect, right? That sometimes it seems to be that we identify the problem where it's not, the real issue lies somewhere else. Right, so that's just an example here, just returning to the slide, what is the pressing problem? So really simple tweak, don't tell students the issue, present them with statistics and facts and ask them to decipher and decode essentially the puzzle of what the issue actually is. And then again, once they've clarified the problem, now we move into daring to dream. We go into that appreciative inquiry, the imagineering, right? What would be an ideal solution to this problem? Let's start unpacking that. And what I want you to notice in some of the prompts on this slide is again, creating those opportunities for thinking and a community of thinkers. So being accountable to discussing with a partner, putting your initial ideas into your thought book that you're going to revisit. So again, these small little tweaks and invitations that are really nurturing a thinking community. We also need students, what's really important in whatever we're designing, when we're asking them to make a decision, it's very important that they understand the criteria by which they're making that decision. So in this case, if we're asking students to create some effective actions to address the problem or issue, we need to unpack that criteria with them. We can't expect their solutions to be effective if they have not internalized and do not have a deep understanding of what we are referring to when we're talking about effective actions. So this is some sample criteria. It doesn't mean you wouldn't change this for your particular context, but it's just an example, right? That we're wanting students to internalize that an effective action shows a deep understanding of the problem, not just a surface understanding, that it is actually realistic and doable, that it creates more long-lasting change that benefits the community, and it's important that it receives widespread support. So helping them internalize this criteria helps them to become much more impactful problem solvers. Another really critical idea when we're talking about citizenship is that capacity that I fear at times it feels like, you know, if we only followed our news, it feels like we're losing, which is that ability to consider diverse perspectives. And so if we're looking at an issue, how do we get students to take on various stakeholder roles and have to consider all the different ways that different groups would look at the same problem? Right? So looking at those prompts again, thinking about how the thinking, the critical thinking, is being invited and nurtured. I do find that especially today, given what we're seeing with social media, that it has this incredible opportunity, provides an incredible opportunity to have access to diverse perspectives, and at the same time can also really silo people in echo chambers. And so the ability, the opportunity in our classrooms to support students in considering diverse perspectives, I feel is such an important dimension of what we are doing today and what we need to be directing some of our attention to today. I love also the fishbowl strategy as a wonderful way to nurture listening. So if you're not familiar with the fishbowl, the idea would be that there's a group of students sitting in the middle, so if you see that smaller circle, and they're having the discussion, right? So it might be that in that circle are all the different stakeholders that we had outlined. I'll just go back for a second. So all of these stakeholders, the skateboarders, neighbors, local government officials, skateboard park builders, skateboard store owner, parents, let's say they're all sitting in this middle circle. And on the outside are the students, and they're listening to the conversation between stakeholders. So they're having to listen to the different perspective whenever it's their issue. So let's say it's skateboard park. Let's say another group of stakeholders is looking at the issue of homelessness. Let's say another group of students is looking at the issue of the quality of water on, on First Nations reserves. So, you've got these different stakeholder groups, and then the students are all listening and hearing these different perspectives. A really, really powerful strategy for nurturing diverse perspectives. And then students having to, this would be for grade, this was framed for a grade 6, but again, you can explore along the continuum how you might bump this up for a civics class. In different ways, how you might frame this within a law class. How we can, again, nurture these diverse perspectives. And I wanted to give you an example of what a thinking strategy might look like. It looks just like just a worksheet, but it's actually just framing very simply at times, but with some intention, a way to scaffold and support students thinking about these issues. So after they've listened to the group conversations, or as they're listening, having them identify the different perspectives, right? Who wants more government spending? Who wants less? Who sees this issue as a matter of human rights? Who's ready to take responsibility? Who wants someone else to act? And being able to identify the diverse perspectives and positions. And so this is a thinking strategy that can be developed, one of thousands really, of ways that when we're asking students to make decisions, how are we supporting them to make those decisions? And this is coming, we've developed an inquiry pack for grade 5 actually. I said grade 6, this is actually grade 5. So around the unit around the government. So we have an inquiry pack that is available that this is from. And again, what do we mean by widespread support? So now that we've just engaged students in understanding stakeholders, they're going to have a different perspective on the idea of widespread support. Hopefully they're going to have a more complex understanding, a deeper understanding of how they're going to have to address this issue. Right? So nurturing in students the ability to see what is involved in democratic processes and decision making. So I just want to give everyone a moment right now just to revisit your thought books. Just on the last section that we looked at, just before we move on, I just want to give people a moment to maybe gather their thoughts or to perhaps ask some questions if you have some questions that have surfaced from what we just explored, or to perhaps ask me to make sure I address a particular issue that at this point you'd really like to see me address before the end of our time together. So just give us a little moment. I just want to make sure, again, with a thumbs up, or if people are finding this useful at this point, or if there's somewhere else they would like me to go. I do have some more examples now that I do want to share, but just wanting to check in with the group, just see where everybody is. Okay, so I'd like to spend a little time just looking at some quick ideas now to nurture thinking citizens. So these are some structures that we can use, and again, applicable from grades 5 up to grade 12, and you can think about the curriculum and how you might use this structure with the curriculum. So a dashboard where you might ask students, whether they fully support or fully oppose an idea at the very beginning as you introduce it. For example, do you fully support the idea of lowering the voting age to 16, or fully oppose? And as they explore and learn more about the issue, again, you continue to have them revisit this dashboard so that they become engaged because we've invited them into thinking about the issue. Determining the degree. So this is another structure, right? Considering the degree to which elements have constituted an outcome. So to what degree was it power, greed, cultural misunderstanding, or prejudice that contributed to government policy on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples? Having students, give them a series of blank pies, and, the first day they have to fill it in, midway through or partway through, have them revisit as they learn more, have them revisit again. And so you're nurturing their thinking, the ability to consider information, change their minds, critically inquire into this issue, rather than just essentially learning the facts. We've problematized, we've invited some intellectual engagement. Another structure is curation. So here I've got an example of select the 5 most essential songs for a social justice playlist. But you could also, looking at the history curriculum in grade 10 in particular, where you could curate a whole exhibit where you're asking for the individuals who have made the most significant contributions to civic understanding or identity in Canada, and thinking about all the complex decision-making and rich decision-making that students would need to do, in order to create that exhibit. So this idea of curating, whether it's songs, individuals, artifacts, art pieces as well, that could also come into the history curriculum, where you use art as a way in which to enter in and explore the issues that deepen our understanding of citizenship and civic action and social movements within Canada as well. So curation is another structure, but using that criteria, right? Essential, significant, impactful, inspiring. Rank ordering. So presenting students with a series of responses or solutions and having them rank order. Again, rank order individuals who have made the most significant contribution to democratic society, right? Having students rank order that so that as they're learning, they're making decisions. They're having to think more deeply about what it is that they're exploring. Generating examples and non-examples is another powerful structure. So in this case, we're talking about an inclusive society. Well, what are non-examples of an inclusive society? And from that, again, we're We're nurturing those kinds of world shapers who start to have deep understandings of concepts, fundamental concepts and values like inclusivity, like equity, justice, sustainability, what's environmental regeneration. So having them think deeply through concept attainment is very, very powerful as well. Inviting students into local and global issues by decoding an image. So if this picture came to life, let's have students step into pictures of current issues that relate to both global and local citizenship. What would people be saying to each other? What would happen next? Would someone else enter the picture? What would they do or say? And this is a really powerful one because it also allows for differentiation, because all students can enter into this challenge from where they are. And perhaps you might invite them, you might give them a briefing sheet on the issue of oil spills, have them read it, and then revisit this image, come back to it, nurture their capacity and understanding about what's actually going on. Constructing a powerful caption, so presenting current events and current issues, and having students construct powerful captions to just engage them, to get them into the issues that you want to explore, where you're wanting to explore current events and current issues related to citizenship. And then you've made them hungry for some of the learning that's going to come. I'm going to include this. It will be sent to everyone and posted with the recording. But we've developed a powerful lesson plan around the U-shaped discussion, where instead of it's somewhat similar to fold the line, but it is that students. You've got a student who takes a position strongly for something and one who holds the position of being strongly against. And then students must line up in a U. So they must talk to each other and decide if they are, are they closer to the equally for or against? Are they closer to strongly for compared to the person beside them? And you invite people along different points of the U to share their perspective. And we have some powerful assessment tools for both the teacher and the students that relate to open-mindedness. And students, again, come to understand that what's being valued is their ability to consider and be open to diverse perspectives. And then you provide students with an opportunity at different points to, if they want to move along the U at various points, you say, okay, if you want to move along the U, now you can move your position. And so the U-shaped discussion allows for this really powerful way of hearing diverse perspectives and nurturing open-mindedness. And I will be including that. That will be sent to all the participants. Another structure is bringing issues related to citizenship and the choices that students are making and their families are making and communities are making, and having students redraw the image. So think about all the different images you might give students, and what you're having them do is to nurture their thinking about that issue is to redraw it. What's another perspective on this? What's another way we might present this image? And as we do some research and inquiry into it, how might our thinking about it change? How might our perspective on this issue change? And again, ways of nurturing, understanding current events so fundamental to citizenship suggest a headline. And this can happen across grade levels in all of the social studies, history, geography, law classes, politics, civics. But, put the picture there and then suggest a headline. Again, that invitation for speculation, for prediction. Everyone can enter into that. And as you build the background knowledge, because imagine that you've got the discussion going and now students are hearing from each other and their background knowledge is building through the discussion that's happening as they're suggesting a headline for this image. Okay, so ways to engage and nurture that level of literacy of current events and current issues. So again, just wanting to invite people if they wanted to just take some of what we just did in that section before we move into our final section for the evening, if there's anything you wanted to note for yourselves. I wanted to invite you to take a look at this. And I'd like you to star, as you look it over, to star for yourself what you feel you're currently doing very well in your classroom. To put a little check beside something you'd like to potentially tweak, that you feel like, yeah, I'm doing that, but I'd like to do it a little bit better. And something that and perhaps another symbol for something you aspire towards, that you're not doing this, but it's something you really would like to put some intentionality behind and start to do. And you can either physically do it, or if you want to keep that personal for yourself, you can do that as well. But I'd like you to take a moment and really look this over and think about, again, affirming what you're doing really well, revising something you're doing but you think you could tweak it a bit and enhance it. And the third is what you're aspiring to do. So Veronica, if you just, with the clip art, it's, I think if you go to what looks like the sun in the little toolbar to the right, and then you can click on one of the symbols and then just drag it over. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone's had a chance to do this. If you need more time, to feel free to raise your hand so I know. It's one of the challenges is I can't see what everyone's experiencing. So just, I think, just a little bit more, give people a little bit more time. Okay, and what I wanted to share with you is to come back to this example. This is grade 7 geography, the inquiry pack, that I want to show you when we're talking about this as nurturing world shapers through critical inquiry. I just want to share with you this coming to life in a real way and in a powerful way. So this is for grade 7 geography. There were some students who definitely, you know, coming in were sort of like, I don't know what geography is. They'd never done geography. They weren't sure how they felt about geography. And when asked to do their message to the world, this is one student. This is a young student who basically said, I'm not so into geography. When he came in, I'm not sure how to feel about this subject. And this was the very first day, his message to the world. So before we had really started delving into the issues. So, you know, as we're looking at engagement, I think I could say there's a level of care here the student has, you know, about what's happening in the community. But clearly there's not a very deep understanding about the issues. And as the students were invited to engage in an inquiry, this is an example of one student's thought books, where what I wanted to point out is you can see along the left, because they were collecting powerful ideas, they had to select 4 powerful ideas for their final compelling message. I just want you to notice that, you know, sort of the power of them collecting as they go through, and then the highlights are as they're using that criteria of a powerful message, they're starting to select, they're starting to make those reasoned judgments based on their internalization of the criteria. And on the right, the student is starting to, and they're dating it. It might be hard to see that, and so I'm sorry about that, but they're actually dating as they're thinking of ideas for their compelling message, things they want to say, things they're learning that they think are important. They're developing this iterative process where, as they're inquiring into the issues and they're being scaffolded by understanding what geographic evidence is and the need to support their reasoning with geographic evidence, as we're unpacking criteria and they're being explicitly scaffolded to use criteria to make reasoned judgments. And they're doing this through interactions with geography, the subject matter, the curriculum expectations. And so as that process unfolded, this is the reflection of that same student at the end of the 8-week, actually it ended up being 12-week unit. This was the student's final reflection. So when we go back to that taxonomy of engagement and challenge and transformation, this student was not taught what to think, but was scaffolded in a process of learning how to think and thinking deeply about issues that matter within our society and within a democracy. And you know, the growth from that first message to being able to understand, even metacognitively, you know, that they've been changed in some way, that as they understood issues more deeply and made decisions about those issues themselves, that they have been changed, that now they want to become part of the solution, that they themselves want to be world shapers, active, engaged citizens. And that's the power of a critical inquiry approach when students are supported and scaffolded and invited into thinking deeply about these issues. It was very interesting because when I taught this grade 7 unit, in my first class I did a blind poll, meaning I had the students put their heads down so they couldn't see, and I asked them, how many of you feel that you have a role to play in the environmental change that our community is experiencing? And I'd say that maybe half, not quite half of the students raised their hand. And at the end of the unit, I asked the same question, and every single student raised their hand. And again, it wasn't about them being taught what to think. It was learning how to think about these issues and understanding that they have a role as a citizen in what's happening, and that there might be some choices that they can make that could make a difference as well. So when we frame our tasks in ways that invite critical, collaborative, and creative thinking, I think we are taking really powerful steps towards nurturing world shapers. That when we come back to this idea of citizenship, the foundation of citizenship being the kinds of choices that we make, our decision making, our ability to make good decisions, and the kind of relationships that we're able to create as well. Understanding our relationships with one another, with our communities, with the broader web of life, that those are really, really powerful dimensions to put at the heart of our teaching. So I'm hoping that you've been able to, through the course of this webinar, determine 3 powerful instructional choices. If you'd like to just take a moment to perhaps share, maybe your top 3 or some of the top 3 things that you learned, just so we have a chance to hear from each other as a community at the end of the session, that would be great. If you want to place your ideas in the chat box, or if you just want to take the mic, I encourage you to do that as well. I'm not sure if people, I think I see a couple of people typing, but I do encourage you to just take a moment right now just to perhaps write maybe 3 things that you're perhaps planning to try, 3 tidbits that you're taking away. Thanks for that, John. And actually, one of the things is, for people who have done some work with us, is we talk about the 6 different ways that you can frame a critical challenge, and we do some work around critique the piece, judge the better or best, decode the puzzle, design to specs, perform to specs, and, oh, I suddenly forgot the last one, rework the piece. So there are these 6 different ways that we can in fact frame a critical inquiry question. And I just wanted to share that some of the resources we've shared, we do have some powerful critical inquiry units at the consortium. There is a fee just for the production. We're a not-for-profit, but we invested a lot to sort of create units that could potentially replace textbooks. And there's some powerful units relating to citizenship education in both grade 5 and grade 7 that we've developed. So I encourage you to check those out. And even if the launch and first lesson are free, as well as the whole synopsis, and that might give you ideas even if you don't want to necessarily purchase the unit, you can get some really powerful ideas and examples for things you want to do in your own classroom. Yes, criteria. We also, if you're bored, and if you go to our website, tc2.ca, and you look at our list of partners, if your board is partnered with us, and you create an account using your work email, you have access to a wealth of resources, including 80 tools for thought lessons. And you know, I've sort of outlined some of the ones we have are clarify the problem, some of the very issues that we talked about, identifying significance, considering diverse perspectives. We have tools for thought lessons that really support this kind of thinking, as well as critical challenge lessons, source documents. So I encourage you to go look, see if your board is a partner. Individual memberships are $40 a year, and that gives you access to everything as well. So that might be another option. Perhaps your department might support you in that if your school or district isn't a partner. And just to sort of end us off tonight, with the words of Nelson Mandela, it's been such a privilege to be with all of you tonight, coming to this webinar because clearly you, I think, share this belief in a really important way. And so thank you for the work that you are doing to nurture citizens, because you know, when I'm 90 years old and these students are the key decision makers, I know that I'll be in good hands because of educators like you who are shaping the kinds of citizens who will be those decision makers. So I want to thank you very, very much for coming. And if you do want to reach out to me, here's my email address, or on Twitter. I encourage you, you know, I'd love to connect on Twitter or via email. And I will turn it over to Trish, as I know she has some closing things she'd like to do.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much, Maria. That was fabulous. But a quick turn off the recording and do my thing.